What's up, Steelers fans? Welcome back to Around the Burgh. We're back with Mitch and Shayne. We're back for our third episode. We're going towards the end of July. We're coming up against training camp. Players are reporting. We're finally getting out of silly season in the summer. We're going to talk about some actual topics that pertain to Steelers football on the field, as opposed to random things on social media and such. Shayne, how are you doing tonight?
Doing all right. Looking forward to
Awesome.
training camp starting here.
Oh yeah, big time. All right. Well, we had a pretty chock full show planned before we logged on tonight. But then we got the report that I'm sure everybody's seen by now that Vince
Yeah.
Williams is going to be retiring from the Steelers at age 31 after playing the NFL for 8 seasons with the Steelers when we selected him in 2013, which it's pretty surprising given that he was cut early in the offseason and then he was re-signed by the Steelers and now he's retiring less than a week before training camp starts. So Shayne, what do you make of this pretty shocking reveal that happened just a few hours ago?
Yeah, like you said, it's interesting that he was cut, re-signed, and now is deciding, now is the time. Because a lot of the time, obviously, if a guy is cut at the end of his contract and then he doesn't come back or whatever, then if he retires, it makes sense, right? Like he's let go. He doesn't think he can play anymore. But the Steelers clearly wanted him back, and he clearly wanted to be back. And we'll probably find out more over the next few days about what went into that decision. But it's probably, and this is kind of the case a lot of the time, is he probably was getting ready for camp, was trying to get his body ready to go, and maybe just didn't feel right. He didn't feel like he was really prepared, and instead of going out there and giving it a shot, knowing that he probably felt like he wasn't going to be able to do it, decided, let me not waste anybody's time. Let me not waste my time. I'm just going to call it quits right now, which is unfortunate, but
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were talking about a pre-show that this is not the first time the Steelers have kind of done this. Even in this offseason, we saw it kind of with David DeCastro, who seemed like he was going to be back. Then there were some mumblings in minicamp that he wouldn't be ready. And then eventually the Steelers cut him in what seemed almost like a forced retirement. And of course, we've seen it with Troy Polamalu back in the mid 2010s when it was clear that he was not playing up to his own standards and he was cut, he retired. It's a little murky, but we'll come back to Troy later in the show. I've got some more fun stuff to talk about with him. We were also talking about, you mentioned that we're looking on Vince's Twitter timeline. Obviously, Vince is a very active Twitter user.
Yes, he is.
One of the funnier members of the Steelers on Twitter, especially. And there's some, if you were following, you might have been able to see this coming. So for example, his pinned tweet is from June 24th, and it says, "I lost $3 million, but I found Jesus in TBH. I'm perfectly fine with that." Which this wouldn't be the first Steelers linebacker to retire, surprisingly, for being called to religion. If we remember, Jason Worlds.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's right.
How about that deep cut? There we go. This
There
is
we
why you
go.
come here, folks. The deep
Right.
cuts. Steelers.
Jason World's content, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then we got another one where he quote tweeted an article about Robert Spillane becoming the next great Steelers inside linebacker, and Vince said 100% no for a fact he can. So, I mean, you can tell Vince is optimistic about the guys replacing him.
Yeah.
He said, here's one, like I've said before, professional sports are extremely stressful and mentally taxing. So, he's always been one to wear his heart on his sleeve. So, if you were really following the breadcrumbs, you might have been able to reach this conclusion before the rest of us did.
For sure. And I think that's part of it. I feel like probably too is he realized that the guys that are going to be able to compete to play next to Bush are good enough where he probably felt like either he wasn't going to be that guy or didn't need to be that guy. I think is more important.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So as one linebacker leaves, I think we can say that the Steelers brought another one in earlier this week, which is really exciting. Earlier this week, Melvin Ingram got signed to the Steelers for a 1-year deal, I believe for
$4 million.
With $4 million. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's the edge rusher from the Chargers, who the Chargers cut, and Melvin Ingram's, will say this, he is getting up there in age, but I think this is going to be a really good signing because, like we talked about the last 2 episodes, the Steelers really need some edge depth, and getting a veteran guy like Melvin Ingram, who was a really good player for a few years. I mean, his stretch from about 2015 to 2017 was pretty dominant. Once he was able to stay consistently healthy. Problem is, last 2 years he's had a little bit of struggle with injury, but I think that given the team's presumed starters with TJ and Alex Highsmith at that position, they might be able to preserve him and give him a better chance at playing more consistently and not getting hurt.
Yeah, and I think the key thing with him is if you put him in just a pure pass rusher role, you don't ask him to do any of the traditional 3-4 outside linebacker stuff that we asked him to do, where dropping coverage occasionally, do that type of stuff, play the run consistently. If you let Highsmith handle a lot of those duties that he was able do last year pretty well. We saw him with the interception against Lamar and stuff like that. Like he can do that type of stuff. Let Melvin come in on third downs, especially let him just be a pure pass rusher. And it takes a lot of pressure off Highsmith, I think, because although I do expect a lot from him this year, I think he's going to be a really good player. Now we have somebody that if the pass rush isn't quite there consistently, or maybe he isn't doing well against power, maybe tackles who are just getting their hands on him because it's not the strongest player right now. Ingram can kind of come in and help deal with some of those types of players if he's not doing well there.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see like how much of a mentorship role he takes with Alex Highsmith, because obviously this is kind of be like how James Harrison taught TJ Watt during Watt's rookie year. You got this experienced veteran who you could quibble with exactly their play styles, but you can draw some similarities between James Harrison and Melvin Ingram as players and not just, aged
Right.
veterans who have been around the league for a while. So that I'm excited about that too. It's funny you mentioned the coverage thing. I was looking at Ingram's stats on PFF, and in multiple years, he had snaps where he was aligned as the free safety.
Yeah, the Chargers defense, like some of the stuff they're doing, because he was, to me, like coming out of, I believe, of South Carolina, where he came out of. When he came out, I thought of him as more of a pure edge rusher, like a 4-3 defensive end type of fit. But he was able to play that 3-4 spot occasionally, pretty well and do everything for that team. And he even rushed inside occasionally. I know he lined up inside. Like he is a multiple piece. I think as he's gotten older and maybe now, like I think you want to have a more defined role with him, obviously, but the versatility that he showed in the past, like he definitely can do a little bit of everything for us if need be.
Yeah, like I'm not asking him to play him off the ball at all,
not,
but
not much,
I mean he's still an excellent interior rusher, especially on like stunts, twists, and loops and everything. Which the thing that I'm really interested in is, especially with Vince's retirement, are the Steelers maybe going to run like a 5-man defensive line with one linebacker in which you have Hayward into it, and then Alualu as the spell, and then you've got Watt, Highsmith, and Ingram, and you can move Ingram and Watt kind of all around the formation, especially Ingram. Move them all around the formation, maybe get back to some of that radar defense we saw with like the LeBeau defenses, where you had one or maybe two down defensive linemen, everybody else standing up, just kind of moving around to confuse the offensive line. Because in the recent years, Steelers have been a little more traditional just in terms of how they're rushing the passer from an alignment standpoint.
Yeah.
But I think that with this, maybe we could see them getting back to that a little more, where even just the alignment is going to confuse the offensive lineman. And then rushing 5, you've got 5 one-on-one matchups with 2 of the best interior defensive linemen in the league and arguably the best edge rusher in the league in TJ Watt.
It's going to be interesting to see if they kind of take that approach, because I think if you use Ingram as a chess piece like that, as far as a rusher, move him in and out, stunt him, him and Tuitt, especially if you were to stunt those two.
Oh.
I mean, like Hayward is like as good as Hayward is, like he is that power push the pocket guy. Like Tuitt is the quickness on the inside. You have those two run stunts off each other and get the guards confused. Oh, geez.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. I'm really excited.
It's definitely gonna be fun to see. I do hope they do more of that stuff, because they can. They're gonna have the people to do it. Like Highsmith isn't really a great fit if they didn't have a guy like Ingram to do a lot of the stunts and stuff, but Ingram is able to do that, which is nice.
Well, as long as we're talking about offensive tackles getting put in blenders, we're going to move on to the other Steelers signing, which is Chaz Green, who was, I think, most recently with the Colts and has started some games for them. He's a big offensive tackle, originally out of Florida, kind of like Trent Brown, who he's back with the Patriots. Chaz Green, I believe, is most famous for a game against the Falcons, I think 2 years ago, where he gave up, I want to say 6 sacks to Adrian Claiborne.
I believe so. I think it was 6. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something insane. And like Adrian Claiborne's been a very solid player in this league for a long time, but I mean, 6 sacks is insane. But this is just another kind of depth offensive lineman. He's kind of similar to Zach Banner. So I'm not anticipating him playing much. I haven't really done any film work on him, obviously, considering this. I was on vacation for the last weekend, and now NFL Game Pass is down apparently because they're allegedly doing work on it. We'll see what that means.
Right.
For our Pennsylvania listeners, this is basically the PennDOT working on the turnpike.
Yeah. Hopefully they do something. I mean, I want to be able to get into that. But.
Right. So, but anything on Chaz Green?
Really, for me, like you said, I personally don't think he makes the roster
Mm,
unless someone really just craps the bed in camp.
mm,
Like I think Haig is going to be the swing tackle.
yeah, definitely.
Realistically, I think he's the swing guy. I think that Moore Jr. probably makes the roster just because he's a fourth round pick. Like he'd have to be bad to
Yeah.
not make it as a fourth round pick. I don't see any other tackle type players making the roster other than those two realistically
You
outside of
think
the
so?
starters.
So are you thinking Coward is going to be a guard?
Yeah, he'll be. I
Okay.
think he's going to be an
Okay.
interior
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Like
For
I
sure.
think he's going to be depth at both guard spots. He just fits better there.
Yeah.
So that I don't expect much from Green, honestly.
Um.
Like
I don't know. It's tough. I think it's possible.
it's
Um.
possible. Like if Haig is not any good and
Yeah,
Green
because like
looks
Haig can
better,
play guard too. So I'm wondering
right?
if they want to kind of have him be like the swing guard,
He
and
could
then
be.
have
Yeah,
Green and
Coward
Green and Coward
easily
be like the swing tackles, and more obviously,
more too. Yeah.
So gives you three backups who have two backups, three backups who have started games in this league and like played competently, and then a developmental rookie that gives
Right.
so I'd be okay with that. As long as again he's not starting against anybody.
Yeah.
So those are the two signings in concrete we have now. But there's been a lot of speculation in the last few days about whether the Steelers are going to be re-signing Steven Nelson and possibly bringing in Newcastle, Pennsylvania native Malik Hooker. So Nelson obviously has been Steelers corner number 2 for the last few years. He's been a really solid player. Has really kind of locked down what was a really troubled secondary for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Steelers cut him. They sort of used that money to re-sign Juju, allegedly, some people think.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the departure wasn't exactly amicable.
No, from what I remember, and I think the specifics were basically that they kind of told him like, you're gonna either take a huge pay cut or you're not gonna be on the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't blame him for not accepting the pay cut whenever. I mean, his play wasn't quite at the level it was his first season with us
Yeah.
because he played very, very well the
Mm-hmm.
first season, but he was still a starting caliber corner last
Yeah.
year. And I think that ideally you'd like to have kept him, especially because it means Sutton can be that pure slot player that I think
Mm-hmm.
he'd be best fit to replace
Yeah.
Hilton. But it's tough. I think that if he does come back, it's going to be just because he doesn't get any better offers. I don't think he's looking to come back necessarily.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think it just comes down to that pretty much.
Yeah, I think he used the word hostage, which
Right.
is kind of parroting a phrase Tomlin had used. So that's I think from what I remember, I think he wanted an extension actually.
Yeah, he wanted
And
to have a new
right.
contract.
And I think just Steelers like, listen, we like the cap's kind of weird right now. Like we just can't guarantee that. And that's kind of what led to his release. I think a lot of people like the Bills game is ingrained in their mind for Steven Nelson, where he's just getting cooked by Stephon Diggs. And like to Nelson's defense, not many people are locking down Stephon Diggs,
especially last year.
Yeah.
I mean, him and Allen,
And,
they made sweet music together.
Exactly. So, I'm willing to give him a little like if he's the ideal corner too, in that, if he's not, matching up against the elite number 1, he's probably going to be fine, especially if you give him some safety help. But again, the other one was Malik Hooker, who was a first round draft by the Colts. A very highly touted draft prospect. The only problem is he had injury concerns going into the draft. He's had injury concerns throughout his career, leading to his release by the Colts. And there's been a lot of smoke about the Steelers signing him, especially given that he's a Pittsburgh native. So Shane, what do you think about Malik Hooker kind of in a vacuum as a prospect, and then how he fits on the Steelers if they do decide to bring him in?
I think it's an interesting fit because realistically, the only true center fielder we have on the roster is Fitzpatrick. He's the only guy that's a true, center fielder type in terms of his ability to cover ground, right? Like Edmonds is still, although he's improved, he's not a true cover player at this point. Still, he's really more of a guy that you want covering the short areas of the field, not deep.
Mm-hmm.
None of the other safeties, especially Killebrew, like he's technically, I guess, our fourth safety at this point, third safety, but he's not gonna cover really anybody realistically.
Yeah.
So I think if you bring him in, it's mostly to have insurance, one, against the Fitzpatrick injury, and two, have a guy that if you need to go to a 3 safety look or want to, will be able to cover more ground than Edmonds or anyone else to be able to.
Right. I think in an ideal world, like I totally agree with everything you said. Like I'd love to bring him in as that, third safety who can play the free safety role, the deep center. Especially then you can kind of get into some fun looks with him as the middle safety, and then Edmonds and Fitzpatrick kind of playing in the overhangs in the slot areas where,
for sure,
Fitzpatrick was really deadly at Alabama, and where Edmonds has, gotten better and continued to improve. The issues is that, again, like health is obviously concerned, but there's been a lot of talk about like his inability and kind of not as much, but unwillingness to tackle. And,
Yeah.
there's been some chatter about that issue with Fitzpatrick, who's
Yeah.
an elite
Yeah.
NFL safety. So given that, I'd be surprised really if the Steelers bring him in. I still might like to see it just because he gives you a different option than kind of the converted linebackers the Steelers have at their backup
Right.
safety spots. So, that's kind of what we're seeing right now in terms of those free agent signings. I'm not sure that's going to happen given that we're really getting close to camp now. I think they're just going to stay with the guys they have. Basically just try to, stick with those stocks. Speaking of stocks, Symbol is the stock market for sports where you can buy and sell virtual shares of your favorite teams using real money. Each time your team wins, you earn a win payout. If your team loses, you lose nothing. Symbol offers trading for the NFL, NBA, and MLB with college football coming in the fall. Visit www.symbol.com today and use promo code SteelersATB to earn a $10 deposit bonus on your first deposit. That's www.simbull.com. All right, so with that out of the way, we are going to move on to, we're going to kind of go back to our last week's episode where we're talking about some reports and some opinions of people. So ESPN published an article and it was by Bill Barnwell, kind of ranking the offensive arsenals of every team in the NFL. Now, Shane, I don't know about you. I love Bill Barnwell. I think he's probably ESPN's best NFL analyst. He does a really great job of breaking down things from both a schematic and an analytical point of view, which it seems like a lot of those perspectives are mutually exclusive among people. It's either tape or numbers. But I think Barnwell does a really good job, and I usually agree with most of the things he says, but I'm a little skeptical on this one because he ranked the Steelers offensive arsenal 15th. Now, this is specifically dealing with wide receivers and tight ends, which I think is good because for me, at least when I look at groups like offensive skill groups, or really any players, I guess, I tend to kind of take rookies out of the equation because we just don't know. So if you look at the Steelers running back room and you take out Najee Harris, who's lovely displayed behind Shane here, if you're watching on YouTube, the Steelers running back room, I believe we described as cheeks or posterior.
Yeah, pretty much.
So because you got Benny Snell, Jalen Samuels, Anthony McFarland, Kalen Ballage, of course, and Trey Edmonds, who's basically a special teamer.
Yeah.
So Shane, if you have this up, can you kind of give us what this article is going for here?
Yeah, I do have it up. I will say he does have running backs weighted, but just less than wide receivers and a little bit less than tight ends because it is more about the actual arsenal of weapons, not necessarily the run game. But as far as what he has to say about the Steelers, so just to give some context, last season he ranked us 13th going into the season, which, respectable considering, weren't sure what we're going to get at Claypool and all that stuff. But I think he does bring up the fact, and this is why I think that where he might be having some concerns with us is that we've been a wide receiver factory for, well more than a decade now. And Claypool obviously broke out as a rookie. And I will be honest with you, I didn't expect that myself either going into the season. So definitely won't blame him for that at all. Not expecting that. But the biggest thing he seems to have an issue with is Juju, honestly. I think he specifically is worried about the fact that he hasn't been able to get back to that 2018 form since, that season ended. Now, obviously 2019 was injury issues as well. And then last year dealing with average depth of target being like probably 2 yards, it felt like sometimes. But I think he just seems to be more concerned about their ability to create after the catch, because that's what it's going to have to be a lot of it, admittedly, with Ben. So
right. And then I think he argues that, the Steelers' best run after catch player was Deontay Johnson, who had the drop issues. He was targeted a ton. His yards per target was pretty low.
Yeah.
And he acknowledges that some of the issue was on Ben's arm. And that the ceiling, if everything works, like this, the ceiling is very high,
right?
But there's still and I respect that. There's questions, so the questions basically mean you can't really rank them as high. So, and the thing that is a little confusing for me specifically, I suppose, is he has them in order behind the Ravens and the Bengals, which is pretty confusing to me. He's got the Browns are fourth, which I'll totally respect. They have probably the best backfield in the NFL.
Yeah,
Got two
if
excellent
OBJ
wide.
shows up too, that's an X
Yeah.
factor for sure.
Yep. And they've got three tight ends really, who are like Austin Hooper's a great kind of combo tight end. Njoku's, if he's healthy, is a pretty good wide receiver or receiver talent. And Harrison Bryant was a pretty surprisingly good player as their third tight end. But getting behind the Ravens and the Bengals, Ravens at 14, Bengals at 13 is I'm a little lost there on both counts, because like I said, for me, I'm not taking rookies into account really. So if you take Jamar Chase out, they've got T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, and I like Tyler Boyd a lot. But I think you could argue that he's kind of just a faster version of Juju, maybe a little more versatile. And like T. Higgins was good, but I don't think anything specific like to write home about that would be like significantly better than what the Steelers have.
That's the thing, right? Is it's not so much their 15th overall placement, which is still a little lower than I would have expected, but not like drastically lower. It's having the Ravens and the Bengals ahead, especially the Bengals, mostly because, again, do we all expect Jamar Chase to be really good, especially being paired back up with Burrow? Sure. I'm sure there's an expectation there that he's factoring in. I'm sure he talks about it, but he's still a rookie. We don't know what that's going to look like. Higgins was a very good player, but I would argue, especially, based on their skill sets, I would bet on Claypool long-term more than Higgins, just because he's got some more juice to him for sure. And yeah, Boyd's great. I don't think he's significantly better than Deontay Johnson or Juju Smith-Schuster really in any way, especially in his role.
I think I would argue that Boyd's low is definitely higher than Johnson's floor.
Right. That's the thing. Right. And so like, that's fine, but they really don't have anything at tight end.
Yeah. Like,
Joe Mixon's hit or miss.
Uzoma and who's that? Oh, Drew Sample, the Washington in the draft, and like didn't play at all.
Yeah, because he's a blocking tight end in the draft.
And Mixon is, he's I think I like Mixon as a player a lot.
Yeah, when he's on, he's on. He's really good when he's playing.
And but now they're in this kind of weird air raid offense that isn't great for him. And we haven't even gotten to the Ravens, who
that's what I was gonna say.
Like again, so we'll run it back. They got a rookie. So this is random, but when Sammy Watkins was coming out in the draft, I said, like, if this guy stays healthy, he's a Hall of Fame player. And he hasn't been healthy, so I cannot be held accountable for my take, which I love. But he apparently, of course, it's like camp talk, but everybody's been like, "Oh man, he looks incredible." But let's say Rashad Bateman is your rookie; he's your rookie, so you can't really take him into, or I wouldn't take him into account. Sammy Watkins is some kind of amalgamation of Deontay or Juju. And then they've got Marquise Brown, who is kind of a Deontay clone as well. He's small, he's fast, he's got drop issues. And Mark Andrews, who is solid, but Mark Andrews is really, I think, a pretty inconsistent player.
Yeah.
They're getting Nick Boyle back, which is a target kind of, more so just a big blocker.
Right.
So and then we haven't even mentioned James Washington yet.
Yeah, that's the thing is the Steelers' depth at skill position too, because McLeod is a guy who could pop off for a play service often too. I think the only thing I'll give him with the Ravens, and I don't know, I'd have to read over specifically to see if he talks about it. I think if you factor in the way that they run their offense, I guess it makes a little bit more sense, because the wide receiver and tight end talent, while it's important, it's not quite as important for that offense as it is the running backs, which Dobbins and Edwards as a combo is.
Oh yeah,
I'll give him that.
I'll give him that, because like I love Dobbins coming out. I was heartbroken when we didn't draft him, and then I was even more heartbroken when the Ravens took him, because I was like, that's a perfect fit. But anyways, so I get that, especially with our 7th rookie running back. So again, I think because he's talking, and in my mind, when we're just talking about the receiving game, I would definitely put the Steelers ahead of Ravens, but I guess
by a lot. I'm sure he
everything.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, I can get, and again, they're all pretty close, and each team has kind of one big question mark. We've got kind of just the general issue of Ben and what that's going to look like, and Najee. Ravens have Bateman, and then the Bengals have Chase. So you can kind of quill at that. All right. So our next topic, we kind of just came upon today. Mike Tomlin appeared on the Flying Coach podcast with NFL Network's Peter Schrager and the Los Angeles Rams coach Sean McVay, along with the current Rams defensive coordinator, former Falcons defensive coordinator, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Raheem Morris. And basically, Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit just about the clip that you sent to me earlier today?
Right. So they were they were talking about Minka specifically. So McVay was asking Tomlin about, what it's like to coach him, kind of, what that process is like, because McVay actually said it, and I appreciate that he did, because hearing it from him makes me feel good about it. Definitely is, one of, if not the premier safety in the league, is what he described Minka as. And I think Tomlin, the way he talked about it, is basically because of how great of a player Minka is, it's almost as important to ask him what he's seeing, to ask him what his thoughts are on different things, as it is for him to coach him necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And it does liken memories to the Troy, days with us, right? As far as he wants to get him in the position that's going to fit him the best, allow him to be the great player that he is. And by talking to him in that way of being like, what do you see? What are you looking at? Kind of break that down for me. It allows Tomlin to put him in that position to succeed based on what Minka's telling him he's seeing on the field. And just talking about also, and this is something that I never really thought about, but it does make a lot of sense. He specifically said that it's not that hard to get a C player to play like a B player, but it's very hard to get an A player to play like an A player every week, to get the most out of your great players every week. And I'm sure McVay can definitely relate with Donald and those guys.
And he directly mentioned that, or Tomlin brought up Aaron Donald because of the reference there. I thought it was a really interesting clip, because I ended up listening to the rest of the podcast, at least the interview portion, and it was fun in that you got to hear Tomlin kind of cut loose a little bit and talk about some kind of fun stories of his days working with Morris and kind of how they were as young coaches. Some pretty fun anecdotes, not a ton of specific coaching stuff. There was some esoteric discussion about like the philosophy and the meta philosophy of being a coach and coaching and all that. So this was the one time where they really specifically got into football, which, if you've followed Tomlin press conferences over the years, that's a pretty big rarity.
Yeah.
We did get the obligatory quote things of that nature from Tomlin. I think we probably got it obviously in there. I can't exactly remember where it happened, but it was nice to hear him talk like specifically about like a football player and like a football process. And like you said, that way he described, having to elevate players with coaching was really interesting. So I thought that, the clip was really interesting, and the show was, it's fun to hear Tomlin kind of talk about his younger days and working with Morris and all that. But I would recommend watching the clip. I don't know about the whole episode unless you're really into getting into all that.
Right. Yeah.
But that was pretty cool, and it was nice to hear a lot of Minka praise, which we always like to hear. So moving from one Hall of Fame safety to another, we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame induction. So their initial report came out that Polamalu was actually going to lead off the class, and that Bill Cowher was going to finish it. And then eventually that got switched so that Cowher would still be the ultimate recipient, ultimate honoree, and then Polamalu got moved to, I believe, 10th out of 12th. So it would go at the end would be Polamalu, Jimmy Johnson, and then Bill Cowher. I thought putting Polamalu first was interesting, especially given that Dick LeBeau was going to be his presenter. I think a lot of Steelers fans are going to be really interested to see what Polamalu has to say, because he was, after he retired, he was pretty much radio silent for a while. But in the last few months, even just like the last few weeks, he's been doing a lot of media appearances, doing a lot of talking, which, going back to his playing days, that's a pretty big rarity for him as well.
For sure.
So, I think we're all interested to see what Dick LeBeau has to say about him, but I think we're mostly interested to see like how much Troy's going to talk. I'm sure there's some, fun betting lines for length of speech. Cause I feel like Troy could either be like 10 seconds or maybe like a 20-minute thing. So Shane, what did you make of the initial placement of Troy and then the move from him from first to kind of near the back end?
It's interesting. I don't, obviously I'm not sure exactly what the reasoning behind it is, and we won't really know that, but I wonder if it's because of the fact that, they know that, everyone's interested to see what he has to say. And I think they want to let everyone else kind of maybe go ahead of him, because he's definitely, of the guys that are going to be there, he's the one that probably people know the least of as far as him as a person, what they expect to hear from him. And because everyone really just knows him as Troy, like the player himself, like the crazy interceptions, the hair, all that good stuff. Outside of some, like you said, minor stuff, and when he was playing in the commercials for Head and Shoulders, stuff like that. Outside of that, like, people don't really know a lot about Troy, and it's not because they don't care. Obviously, it's just he doesn't really put a lot out there. So it's going to be interesting to see, one, like you said, how long he chooses to speak for, and then what he actually wants to say.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah, I'm pulling up the ones now. So let's see. This is kind of a weird class because we're getting last year's class and 2021's class because of COVID, obviously.
right.
So Steve Atwater, Isaac Bruce, Steve Hutchinson, Edrin James, Troy Polamalu as the players. Then you got Bill Cowher, Jimmy Johnson, the coaches, Steve Sable, Paul Tagliabue and George Young as the contributors. And then a few older players who I'm not sure how many of them are actually going to be there. Donnie Shell, of course, for the older
Yeah.
Steelers
Yeah,
fans,
he's gonna be
is a great ad. Um, yeah, so I think that of those players, I think Steve Atwater probably is an argument, but of those rest of them, I think Troy was probably the greatest or at least the most visible. But again, like you were saying, like not really the most um verbose or like well known. I mean, Steve Hutchinson's a guard, so most people don't know much about offensive linemen. But
yeah, same thing with Faneca.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Faneca's part of the next class, but I think they're doing them the next day, so there'll be two separate ceremonies. So I think that he was originally first because it's kind of one of those things where you want to get some interest at the front end and then
Right.
kind of close it out at the end with obviously with Cowher and Johnson. But then I think they were like, okay, well, people are going to want to tune in for him regardless, so let's just move him to the kind of middle. I think he's the last player going, so that's kind of an honor for him as well.
Right.
The other thing, which is kind of tangential, is that I think Cowher said that he wanted to get on the field for a preseason game and have him and LeBeau coach up one last blitz for Tomlin in the Hall of Fame, at least in the Hall of Fame game, which I was like, listen, like let's do it. That sounds awesome.
That'd be
That's
awesome.
such a nostalgia trip. I'm all here for it. I would love that.
Just run a screen if you're the
I'm gonna be the baby at the Penguins game, just yelling my ass off and just crying and be like, oh yes, please give me more. All right, that's all we have for this week. Like I said, next week training camp will have started. I think we're gonna try to have it on guest next week. We'll see if we can scrounge up a friend of ours to come talk about some Steelers stuff. Once again, we thank you for joining us. We hope you come back again next week. We're really excited to get started. Just a few weeks, we'll be actually talking about real live football with fans in the stands. It's going to be great. We're super pumped. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to have you back again next week. See you next week.